महिमानो नहीं पारेनो अर्थ अनंत Jai Janendra. Welcome to our Tuesday class, which we have resumed after a good break over the festive period. I hope you all had some rest and had some time for some spiritual engagement. Let's start with the prayers as usual, and then we'll carry on with our topic. Namo Orientanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Utsayanam, Namo Loe Sabbasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro Sabbapavapanasano, Mangalanancha Sabvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Utsayanam, Namo Loe Sabbasahunam. Eso Panchanamukaro Sabbapavapanasano Mangalanancha Sabvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Uvatsayanam, Namo Loe Sabbasahunam. Eso Panchanamukaro Sabbapavapanasano Mangalanancha Sabvesim Padmam Havai Mangalam. कमठे धरणेन्द्र च सोचितं कर्म कुर्वति प्रभुस्तुल्य मनोवृत्ति पार्श्वनाथ श्रीस्तु वः वीर सर्वसुरासुरेन्द्र महितो वीरंबुदा संश्रिता वीरेणाभियत स्वकर्म निचयो वीराय नित्यं नमः वीरातीर्थमिदं प्रौतमतुलं वीरशघोरं तपो वीरे श्रीत्रुति कीर्तिकान्ति निचय श्रीवीरभद्रं दिश अंगूठे अमृतवसे लप्तितणा भंडार श्री गुरु गौतम समरिये मनवांछित फलदाता. Topic, as you all know, that we are more than halfway through is the stories on the 10 Upasaks or the 10 Shravaks of Bhagwan Mahavir. Bhagwan Mahavir's total parivar of Shravak, Shravika, Sadhu, Sadhvi in his time was very, very big. But these 10 are selected in the literature as Shravaks whose stories are very inspiring, and they teach us to understand the vows of a Jain householder and man and woman. And the examples of these 10 Shravaks teach us about how steadfastly they followed their vows and how they led their lives in a way to inspire us to understand the 12 vows properly, and also to try and understand the depth of their commitment to following their vows, but also reflect on the strength of their conviction and what was behind that, and how well they had understood the principles of dharma. The story that we left off halfway through before we broke up was that of the 7th Shravak described in this narrative of Upasak Dasa. And his name, as you'll remember, was Sadal Putra. We started off with the story of Sadal Putra and introduced the details of the kind of person he was and what his beliefs were before he met Bhagwan Mahavir. We learned something about his profession, his wealth, what his business was, and how he conducted that. We also learned about how he met Bhagwan Mahavir. And at that point, I introduced the topic of his former guru, that was Goshalak, Mankli Putra Goshalak. We heard about Mankliputra Gosalak when we were learning about Bhagwan Mahavir's 27 lives. We did not go into great detail about Gosalak at that time, but most of you have heard about some aspects of his association with Bhagwan Mahavir. What I suggested at that time was that we would go into some depth about what the particular philosophy that Goshalak had proposed. We will also learn a bit more about Goshalak's initial association with Bhagwan Mahavir, and he was actually a self-declared follower of Bhagwan Mahavir before he attained Keval Gnan, before Bhagwan Mahavir attained Keval Gnan. But later on in life, as a result of his pride and some very grave misconceptions, he set up a totally different path and split away. And towards the end of his life, he actually became quite envious, jealous of Bhagwan Mahavir's success, and pitted himself against Bhagwan Mahavir, and in the end ended up having a sort of a violent confrontation with Bhagwan Mahavir in one of the Dharma Sabhas in the Samvatsaran. And I think I mentioned that during that time, Goshalak ended up burning two of Bhagwan Mahavir's Sishyas and throwing his heat wave power called Tejolesha against Bhagwan Mahavir. But ultimately, as a result of that major misdemeanor, he himself got burnt by that Tejolesha, and his life ended soon after that. Towards the end of his life, Goshalak recognized the grave mistakes that he had made and apologized for it to his Sishyas for misguiding them, and alerted them to demonstrate to the world that his particular behavior was gravely unjust and heinous and shouldn't be followed. And he advised them to set an example of that by desecrating and uh, making sure that his body was insulted in the presence of the whole town after his death by pulling his body behind donkeys and people throwing all kinds of dirty things at the body to set an example that what Goshalak did was wrong. So what exactly and why did Goshalak start off this very different path? Let us look at the story of Goshalak, and that is what I had uh, suggested that we would start off with this time. And what we will do is we will uh, complete the story of Sadal Putra and Goshalak next week. And I think what I was telling Sandipbhai was that we only have about 3 more Shravaks to discuss, and the rest of the narratives are not very long. We got number 8, 9, and 10. and they are all short stories. This one in particular about Sadal Putra and his particular philosophy is actually very important in terms of how misconceptions and misguided beliefs, without going into the depth of the true philosophy, can actually end up with, I suppose Goshalak's greatest fault and sin was his pride and his belief that knowledge of astrology and the predictive sciences granted him the knowledge of Keval Gnan, and proposing that driven by his pride. But the way he misunderstood certain realities, because his vision was very limited, it was one-sided, teaches us a lot about the importance of Syadwad or Anekantwad, or the principle of multifaceted truth. So there are lots of in-depth things that we need to understand about this particular story. We may not have time to go into the depth, but I'm hoping that I can introduce you to the subject and leave you to explore it a bit more in your spare time, and maybe sometime in the future, if we have an in-person event, we can maybe sit down and discuss a bit more about the different aspects of this. Those of you who do also attend the Wednesday class in Gujarati, that is the Anand Ganchoisi that we are currently doing, will recognize that we are discussing a lot of, we are learning about the various different philosophies. And the next stavan that we are going to discuss about Bhagwan Naminath, that is the 21st Tirthankar, that particular stavan talks in depth about the different philosophies. But this particular philosophy of Goshalaka is not mentioned there because it was not one of the major philosophies. And the particular book that we are referring to in that class talks about the principles of Nischay Nai and Vyavhar Nai, and talks a lot about, there is an appendix which describes in detail the various different points of view and how to look at reality and understand it in its full extent by applying different viewpoints, but also warning us about the dangers of adhering to a particular statement without reference to the point from which that particular statement is made. So making a statement from a single point of view and expounding that that is the whole truth and the nothing but the truth in itself creates a misconception. So when we say any particular truth, then we need to qualify it from this point of view. So I think it's probably, we don't have enough time to try and go into the depth of certain other basic principles that we started off our classes with, but that is something that one needs to think about as well. So if you go to the 6 basic tenets or statements that we made right at the beginning, Atma che means the soul exists. Atma nitya che means the soul is eternal. Atma che, Atma nitya che, Atma karmano karta che, meaning it is the doer of karma. Atma karmano bhokta che, meaning it is the recipient of the fruits of that karma. Moksha, meaning that there is a state where there is a release from all other bondages, all bondages of karma. And mokshno upaichi, meaning that there is a way to achieve that particular position. Now, some of these statements are about the absolute. Some of these statements are relative. And if you do not understand the difference between the absolute and the relative, and apply either an absolute or a relative to a statement which is in fact made with the opposite point of view, then we arrive at a misunderstanding. And this is something that Goshalak did. So let's look at his association. And I'm referring to Trisasti Shalaka Purush Charitra, that is the fourth volume, which is totally dedicated to the life of Bhagwan Mahavir. And this particular, those of you who may be reading this, it is on, it is Sarg, the third Sarg, and the 10th Parva. Parva is like a major chapter of the book. And if you have got the copy that I've got, the page number that I'm referring to, and this is in Gujarati, is 36. Trisasti Shalaka Purush Charitra has an English translation as well, but I think the chapter division may not necessarily follow the original. The introduction is made about the parents of Goshalak. His father's name was Monkhli, and he was somebody called Mankhya. So his name was Monkhli, but his profession was Mankhya. Monkhli name koi Mankhya hato. Now, a Mankhya is somebody, he is basically an artist or a painter, and he earned a living by painting, probably selling them, surviving on donations from people appreciating his talent. He had a wife whose name was Bhadra, and they used to be sort of traveling artists. So they would go to different places, make paintings, sell them, introduce themselves, and rely on the public's appreciation of their skill and their art to survive. Once they come to a village or a place called Sarwan, and at that time, Bhadra, who was Monkhli's wife, was expecting a baby, and the time for delivery was near. So they stay in a particular stable of cows, which was owned by a Brahmin, and she gives birth to a son in that stable of cows. A stable in Gujarati or a stable of cows would be called Goshala. Gaushara. You have probably heard the term Gaushala to describe a place where cows are looked after. And Gaushala is also the term that is used for places where cows receive sanctuary. So in India, there are lots of gaushalas which look after cows, which would have otherwise been destined to uh, be sold to slaughterhouses. These are rescued and brought to gaushalas, which are scattered around all over India. The majority of them are managed by Jains, and these cows are looked after for the rest of their lives. They may have other cattle as well. Because this child was born in a Goshala, he was named Goshal. The child slowly grows up and he learned his father's trade. By nature, Goshal or Goshalak was very argumentative and somebody who liked to pick up fights with different people. So he used to uh, end up in all kinds of arguments and fights with people. It was very difficult for his parents to guide him to better behavior. And he grew up in this way without a great deal of education in good behavior. The terms that are used here are Mata Pitane Vash રહેતો નહોતો, જન્મથી લક્ષણહીન હતો અને ઉત્કટ વિચક્ષણ હતો. That means he was quite cunning. Once, and I presume this was probably around his teenage years, what is mentioned is એક વખતે તે માતા પિતાની સાથે કલહ કરી ચિત્રપટ લઈને ભિક્ષાને માટે નીકળી પડ્યા. He fights with his parents and then leaves. He gets the things that he would need to paint his canvases and his paints and disappears from the house. He leaves his parents. Roaming around the country, he comes to the city of Rajguri. Bhagwan Mahavir was in his 12 and a half years period before he achieved, he became Keval Gnani. And he was nearby, and where Goshalak comes and stays in the same place, Bhagwan Mahavir was there. At that time, Bhagwan Mahavir was fasting for a whole month. So he had a series of 1 month fasts, following which he would go and seek alms, some food. And that is the time that Goshalak met Bhagwan Mahavir. Bhagwan Mahavir had just gone out to seek alms to end his 1 month fast. And he comes outside the household of a merchant, Shreshti Putra. The term that is used is Shrestri, whose name was Vijay, and Bhagwan Mahavir took arms. Now, a term, just for those who are interested, that is used is પ્રભુ માસ્ક ક્ષપણનું પારણું કરવાની ઈચ્છાએ વિજય શ્રેષ્ઠને ઘેર કર પાત્ર વડે વહોરવા આવ્યા. Do you know what kar patra means? Anybody? You all know the kinds of things that our Jain sadhu and sadhuji bhagwans carry with them when they go out seeking food from different households. You must have all seen them. These are red-colored wooden utensils kind of thing that they carry, like small pots, one on top of each other. Does anybody? The term that is used is patra. What is kar patra? Did Bhagwan Mahavir carry similar kind of utensils when he went out during the 12.5 years and subsequently?
Is it just whatever fits in your palms?
Yes. So kar patra means Bhagwan Mahavir only took what would fit into that palm, into the palms raised like this. So kar patra. So whatever food was poured or put into that, that would be the meal to break the fast. And there is no period of storing that, taking it anywhere, or so that is how Bhagwan Mahavir's Diksha Paryay of 12.5 years, and every fast that he broke and ate the food, that was how that food was, he accepted that food that would fit into his hands. Kar patra bade voro avya. So Vijay Shrestri, the man who was giving him the food, was very joyous, very appreciative of his good fortune, and he, with great joy in his heart and great devotion, he served Bhagwan Mahavir with the food. And what used to happen at that time was that every time Bhagwan Mahavir broke a fast, the devs who were following him around invisibly, sometimes visibly, would recognize that Bhagwan Mahavir had broken that fast, and they would shout out in joy from the skies and say, Ahodanam, Ahodanam, and to appreciate this particular giving of alms, they would shower very valuable jewels at the place where this particular event would have happened, and that would be the wealth of the person who had donated. એ વખતે આકાશમાં અહોદાનમ એમ ઘોષણા કરીને દેવતાઓએ તેના ઘરે રત્નવૃષ્ટિ વગેરે 5 દિવ્ય પ્રગટ કર્યા. તો 5 દિવ્ય would be Ratnavrusti, Dundubi, so they would be playing celestial instruments. I don't know all the 5 divyas that would, but this happened on a repeated basis during the time that Bhagwan Mahavir was in the 12.5 years of his Diksha Pariyai. So Koshalak, who was nearby, witnessed this, or actually heard about it, who was from people, and he recognized that this particular Muni, meaning Bhagwan Mahavir, is not an ordinary Muni, and wherever he even breaks his fast, the Devs are celebrating that and making that person who has given the food extremely rich. And he said that there is no point in my following my particular profession or trying to make a living by painting pictures, and I should abandon this and just follow Bhagwan, this particular Muni, and I should become his disciple. And if I do that, I'll be following somebody who is great, and everything that surrounds his travels, everything that happens when he's traveling, ensures that I will be well looked after if I just follow him. So he bows down to Bhagwan Mahavir, that I'm here and I will follow you, and I will be your Sishya, meaning I will be your disciple, and I'll only follow you. Bhagwan Mahavir, obviously, before he achieves Keval Gnan, does not accept any Sishyas. He doesn't even give Deshnas. He just stays silent and carries on. And Goshalak just follows him around. And during the day, when Bhagwan Mahavir is standing day or night, when he's standing in Kausag, Goshalak goes in the town nearby, seeks alms for himself, and survives on that. But people see him as somebody who is following this great Muni. And he follows Bhagwan Mahavir day and night. So the second month fast that Bhagwan Mahavir broke was with a gruhast, meaning a prominent person whose name was Anand, in the third month when he breaks his fast. So remember, these are fasts of whole months, Mark Shapan, and Bhagwan Mahavir only goes out once in that month, at the end of the month, to break his fast. The third Mark Shapan was at the house of a person called Sunand. And it's also described what kind of food was given. So with Anand, it just says Khadya Vastu. With Sunand, it says Sarvakam Gun Namna Aharthi. I don't know what kind of food that was, but it's called Sarvakam Gun, described those in those words here. Once in the Kartiki Purma, the 15th day of the month of Kartik, Goshalak thinks that this person that I'm following is extremely knowledgeable. That is what he has been hearing. Let me try and test how great his knowledge is. Now he asks Bhagwan Mahavir this: Hey Swami, that in every house today because it is a big festival day. Kartik Poonam is a great day, and every household is celebrating that day. And when I go out to seek alms, I'm expecting, he says, everybody is celebrating. So what will I get when I go out to seek alms for myself? So he's asking Bhagwan Mahavir this particular question to test Bhagwan Mahavir's knowledge, because he's heard that this person is extremely knowledgeable. Bhagwan Mahavir obviously doesn't have Keval Gnan as yet, but Bhagwan Mahavir has got the highest level of Mati Gnan, Shrut Gnan, Audi Gnan, and Manparyo Gnan. Now, Bhagwan Mahavir during those 12.5 years did not actually say much most of the time. Now, how many of you remember that during that time or part of that time, on and off, initially regularly, but later on and off, a particular Dev was left in place by Indra to look after Bhagwan Mahavir and to serve him and to protect him? How many of you know about that? I think we have talked about it. Does anybody remember what that Dev's name was? So we're talking about this 12.5 years of Bhagwan Mahavir's sadhana kal. He was a yaksh and his name was Siddharth. And he used to just stay, occupy Bhagwan Mahavir's body or stay as a guest in his, the host and Bhagwan Mahavir, and help him in, or try to help him. Bhagwan Mahavir never asked for any help, but Indra had commanded him that it is your job to look after Bhagwan Mahavir, and he used to follow that. But Bhagwan Mahavir never asked him to do anything. But Siddharth, in his own sense and with his own particular way of doing things, he carried on doing things. So Siddharth, at this time, listening to the question from Goshalak, asking Bhagwan Mahavir what he would get in alms to feed himself on this very auspicious day of Kartiki Punam, Siddharth, with his knowledge as a Dev, enters Bhagwan Mahavir's body and says, instead of Bhagwan Mahavir, now those of you who might question this, Devs do have that ability to do this kind of thing. સિદ્ધાર્થ પ્રભુના શરીરમાં પેસીને બોલ્યો કે રે ભદ્ર, ખાટું થઈ ગયેલું કોદરક અને કૂરનું ધાન્ય અને દક્ષિણામાં એક ખોટો રૂપિયો મળશે. So he says to Goshalak, even though this is a great day and people will have cooked some very nice food, what you will get at the end of the day is khatu thai gelu kodrak, meaning a kind of food which is not very tasty, which is actually slightly spoiled. It is going to be sour. Kurnu dhanya, so it is an inferior kind of grain as well that you will get in Diksha. And something as a gift, somebody will give you a coin which is actually a counterfeit coin. So he says, Dakshinama ek khoto rupio morse. And I presume the term rupio is not used in the sense that we understand it as the Indian rupee. Rupio means something made out of rupee, something made out of rupa. Rupa is like, I presume, like brass or copper, and it is an inferior valued coin. Ek khoto rupio marse. Now Goshalak sets out after hearing this imagining that Bhagwan Mahavir has actually told him that, because Siddharth Yaksh is answering a question on behalf of Bhagwan Mahavir, and he is obviously using his Avdignan as a Dev and predicting a particular future for Goshalak on the next few hours. Goshalak roams around the city in the hope that because this is an auspicious day, he is likely to get some very good food. And he walks around like a dog from house to house. Nobody actually offers him any food throughout the day. In the evening, late in the evening, somebody who is a servant in some other place on his way back home takes Goshalak with him to his household, and he gives him kodra, which has actually spoiled. So khata thai gela kodra and a kurapya, and he gives him some grains of a grain called kur. And because by this time in the evening, Goshalak was very hungry, he eats all that very rapidly because he's really hungry. And then this person gives him, because he is a muni of some kind, or he's a tapas of some kind, from the way he was dressed, he recognizes that this is a person that he should give something else to. So he gives him a rupio, a coin, which Goshalak later on tests and discovers that it is a counterfeit coin. And Goshalak at this point decides that this was something that was predicted. So he sets a principle, and this is the basis of his philosophy. He says, Je bhavi hoiche te thaiche. So anything that happens is always predestined. Now, in the context in which he understood this, that is where the fallacy is. And this particular philosophy is called a niyativad, meaning that things happen because they are destined to be. But if you look at what Jain Dharma proposes of why and how things happen, there are many different aspects to that. And applying the principle of niyati without context to all situations is the principle that Goshalak set out. The story goes on to describe how Goshalak, following a different event similar to this, firms up this principle, and in his mind, he is convinced that things only happen because they are completely destined, and he ignores the effect of situations of the time, dravya, kshetra, kal, bhav, karma. All those things are ignored in this particular statement, and he firmly sets this belief, and then later on in life, he spreads that as a philosophy for people to accept. Following this particular event, now this evening when the Goshalak gets this kind of food on Kartik Punam, and when he returns to the place where Bhagwan Mahavir was. He actually doesn't find him there. And he starts looking for Bhagwan Mahavir and doesn't find him anywhere. And he hears later on that Bhagwan Mahavir had broken his fast at the house of a Brahmin called Bahul. And Goshalak thinks that following that, people say that following that particular fast, the breaking of the fast at this Brahmin's house, this Brahmin's house was showered with Panchdivya, meaning lots of great wealth, and Ratno, meaning jewels. And Goshalak thinks that there is no other person for whom this kinds of things would happen. It must be my guru. And he searches around and finds Bhagwan Mahavir, who is deep in meditation at one place. And he is now convinced, and he says that Bhagwan Mahavir is so knowledgeable that he's predicted exactly what would happen on that particular day and what he would eat, and that detail with which the answer to his question was given convinces him that this is the guru that he wants to follow. Until now he was following him, but now he is more convinced and makes a statement to Bhagwan Mahavir and says that please accept me as your disciple formally. And Bhagwan Mahavir doesn't say anything and just accepts what Goshalak is saying and lets him follow. Bhagwan Mahavir lets Goshalak follow him. Going further, they come to a particular, so this particular incident is describing how he firms up his belief of Niyativad. They come to a place called Swarankhal. On the road, along the path, several Gowar, meaning cowherds, people who looked after cattle and roamed the forests with their cattle to let them feed and then bring them back. And they were all cooking some kheer, meaning a dish with rice. And Goshalak mentioned that I am very hungry. And he says to Bhagwan Mahavir, let's go and get some of this kheer from these people. Now, again at that time, the Yaksh Siddharth was again alert and listening to this statement from Goshalak to Bhagwan Mahavir. Siddharth answers on Bhagwan Mahavir's behalf. Not that he knew what Bhagwan Mahavir was thinking, and he was not actually, it wasn't Bhagwan Mahavir who was speaking, but Siddharth took upon himself to be a spokesperson for whatever he thought was right to say. And he says to Goshalak that this particular kheer, the process will not end with a dish that will be made. So he says, Akshir bansej nahi. So they will not actually complete the process. So Goshalak, in his wisdom, says that if this is being said that this kheer will not actually be made, let me try and make sure that it does actually happen. He goes to this cowherds, these Goals, and says to them that my guru who is with me, he has total knowledge of the past, present, and the future. So he's just making it up as he goes along. And a Devarya Trikalagna che. And he's saying, so he interprets what Siddharth Yaksha said, that when this kheer is half cooked, this patra will break. So the pot in which you are cooking it will break. So these goas, these cowherds, are worried about that and are frightened. And they, to mitigate that from happening, what they do is they cover that particular pot with sticks of bamboo and tie them around. And because they had put much more rice in the pot than they should have for it to cook properly, and because the rice then expanded, so they had really stuffed the pot with a lot of rice, and as it was cooking, and because the rice started expanding and the pressure inside started building up, so that clay pot actually burst open. So what Siddharth Yaksh had predicted and pronounced as if Bhagwan Mahavir was pronouncing it to Goshalak, that this kheer will never be made. So this pot actually cracks open as a result of the pressure inside. And Goshalak, or he slightly altered that statement in the hope that he could get the food that was going to be cooked. But exactly what Siddharth Yaksh had predicted did happen, but the Goal had already mitigated that by tying that pot around with bamboo, and all the rice or the kheer that had spread around on the bamboo surround, they took all the kheer from the bamboo where it had got stuck and ate it. However, Goshalak did not get any of that because they didn't share, because the pot had burst open and there was nothing for them except they just wiped clean the bamboo and all the bits and pieces and ate from there. They couldn't give it to Goshalak. And as a result of this particular event, Goshalak firmed up his belief that things happen only because they are absolutely destined to happen. So his particular philosophy got formed up in his mind by this particular incident. That is what I wanted to describe today of Goshalak's Niyativad. We learned in last week's story that Sadal Putra, who was a potter, and he had a big business of manufacturing various different kinds of clay utensils and all kinds of things from clay. And he employed a huge number of people. And he actually owned 500 shops. And many of his traveling salesmen went around selling stuff from door to door. And he was actually quite a rich merchant. But his main profession was he was an expert porter. And he used to believe in the principle of Ajivika. And he was a follower of Goshalak's philosophy of Niyativad before he met Bhagwan Mahavir. We learnt how Sadalputra meets Bhagwan Mahavir following an announcement by a Dev. This was after Bhagwan Mahavir's achievement of Keval Gnan, and Bhagwan Mahavir had already established a Tirth. And a Dev announces that tomorrow you will find that somebody visiting this place who is actually the words that he describes, the Dev from the skies announces in the earshot of Sadalputra that tomorrow a Mahamahan उत्पन्न જ્ઞાન દર્શન દર અતીત વર્તમાન અને ભવિષ્યના જાણકાર અરિહંત જીન કેવલી સર્વજ્ઞ સર્વદર્શી ત્રૈલોક્ય પૂજિત દેવ મનુષ્ય અને અસુરોને અર્ચનીય વંદનીય તથા તથ્ય કર્મોથી યુક્ત એવા એક પુરુષ આવનાર છે. So he describes all the qualities of Bhagwan Mahavir and tells him that tomorrow that person is coming. And he describes that he is somebody who knows the past, present, and the future, who is Kevli, who knows everything, who is worshipped by devs, kings, common people, everybody. He is Arihant, meaning he has conquered his enemies. He is Jinn, he has conquered his senses. And he is full of all kinds of virtues. And that kind of person is coming tomorrow. So Sadalputra imagines that this Dev is talking about his particular guru, because that is the terms in which he understood his guru, that is Goshalak. Now by this time Goshalak had set up his particular philosophy, and using his powers of the predictive sciences, that is Samudrik Shastra and astrology, he had set out a name for himself and kept on promoting his particular philosophy and announcing himself as somebody who had total knowledge of everything. So Goshalak had set up a completely different path in competition, and later on there was a time when he pronounced himself as the real Tirthankar and he said that Bhagwan Mahavir was actually not a Tirthankar, but he was. And that is how Goshalak had later on in his life started promoting himself. So Sadalputra imagines that this Dev is talking about his guru, Goshalak, and he prepares for his arrival for the next day. And we heard that listening to what this Dev had announced 3 times, Goshalak makes preparation, because the Dev has also instructed him that when this person comes, you go and worship him, and you make sure that you invite him to utilize anything that he needs from your shops. So Sadalputra next day goes to this particular park where Bhagwan Mahavir has come, and devs have created a samvasran and people go to listen to him. Sadalputra also goes there dressed for the occasion. He goes around the samvasran 3 times and then sits down. And once Sadalputra sits down, Bhagwan Mahavir as Sadalputra is just preparing to listen, Bhagwan Mahavir describes to him and tells him that yesterday a Dev came and told you this particular, made this particular statement that આગલે જ દિવસે મહામાહણ જીન કેવલી આવવાના છે એવી જે વાત કહી હતી તે પણ કહી સંભળાવી. So he describes to him in detail the exact words that the Dev had used. So Sadalputra is again hearing from Bhagwan Mahavir the event that had happened that had actually brought him to come and listen to Bhagwan Mahavir. And he further tells Sadalputra that you imagined that this statement that the Dev had made about my arrival, you falsely understood that the Dev was referring to your Guru Mankliputra, Goshal. But he says that was not referring to Mankliputra Goshal. So Sadalputra then recognizes that Bhagwan Mahavir is knowledgeable, that he, seeing him, he recognizes that he is Jin Kevli and he has all the qualities that the Dev had described, and that I should bow down to him and I should invite him to take what he needs or he may need from me. And he tells him that I am a porter, I'm a rich porter, I've got lots of shops, and I'm inviting you to go and get whatever you may need. And his association, Sadalputra's association with Bhagwan Mahavir, proceeds from there. And after a while, because Bhagwan Mahavir is there for probably a few days, from I understand from what is being described here, once Bhagwan Mahavir comes along and where Sadalputra is drying some pots and pans, different things that has been made out of clay, and he is drying them out in the sun. And Bhagwan Mahavir, to try and instruct him, asks him a simple question: how did you make this particular clay utensils or pots and pans? And Sadalputra says, before it became like this, it was just plain mud. Then I soaked that mud in water. Then I mixed them with rak and char. So he mixed the mud with some ash and some cow dung. And then I made it into a kind of a mass and put it on a wheel. And then I shaped this particular pot. So Bhagwan Mahavir then says that these pots are being made as a result of the particular material that you used, with the strength that you use, and the power and all the effort that you made. Do these pots come about on their own or as a result of the effort that you made? So Sadalputra responds that they obviously come about because of all the processes that I have made sure the mati, meaning the clay, actually undergoes, so that the material is right for this kind of a utensil, and the effort that I made to shape it in the shape that it is, that is why these things have come about. કારણ કે બધા ભાવો નિયત છે. And then he says, ભગવાન ઉત્થાન બલ વીર્ય સિવાય બને છે. So he is actually propounding the philosophy. So Bhagwan Mahavir is asking him that does this come about as a result of the effort that you made? So he's saying that these things have come about because this was meant to happen. So he is completely denying his contribution to the process, because he says, hey, ભગવાન ઉત્થાન બલ વીર્ય સિવાય બને છે કારણ કે આ બધા ભાવો નિયત છે, meaning that all this was destined to happen on this particular day at this particular time. So my effort has had, and all the things that I've done has not, everything was meant to happen. Then Bhagwan Mahavir, to further sort of clarify this with him, that his understanding is wrong, he says, if somebody comes along and all these various utensils that you made, if they lift them up, throw them about, break them up, or somebody comes along and insults and has a relationship with your wife, would you actually punish the person who broke your pots and pans that you have created and left them out here, or the person who is actually abusing your wife? Sadalputra says, surely I would arrest that person, beat him up, and I would kill that person if he was abusing my wife and then breaking my pots and pans. So Bhagwan Mahavir then says that what happens to your pots and pans by this person and what happens to your wife is also something that was destined to happen according to your philosophy. Then why would you punish that particular person? Because that was meant to happen. It was niyat. Jo uthan bal virya parakram nathi. So if your effort has no meaning and all the processes that you did to manufacture these pots and pans, પરાક્રમ નથી અને બધા ભાવો નિયત જ છે, તો કોઈ વાસણને ચોરતું નથી. That means nobody is actually stealing your pots and pans. ફોડતું નથી, nobody is breaking them. And nobody is actually abusing your wife or having a relationship with her. Then why would you punish those people? According to you, everything is going to happen, and that happens because there is no cause and effect. It just happens. Now, Sadalputra, listening to this, realizes the fallacy of his belief and the fallacy of this particular philosophy that he had learned from Goshalak. And then he begins to understand things better and gradually becomes a disciple of Bhagwan Mahavir, and then takes the 12 vows from Bhagwan Mahavir. And following that, he has a discussion with his wife, and who also follows him, and she becomes a Shravika, and taken those 12 vows. So we'll end this story here. We'll finish what happens to Sadalputra next week. I thought this is important to understand this particular philosophy of Niyativad that Goshalak had proposed, and how it misguided this particular person, initially Sadalputra. Okay. I'll finish here. I know we are a bit over. Any questions? No questions? Shall we end? Okay. Thank you for listening. Hope that this particular, I'm not sure whether there is a particular sect which follows what Mangliputra Goshalak proposed at that time. At the moment, as far as I know, it is not a recognized philosophy in this day and age, or it's not a recognized religion as such. But if there is a belief system, if any one of you is a student of philosophy and religions knows more about that, then please let me know. But if any of you are attending the Wednesday classes, we'll start off with Naminath Bhagwan's Tavan. We'll be discussing a lot of the other philosophies in that particular class. Okay, just one thought for people to take back and think over the next 2 or 3 weeks is Sandeep and I had a conversation about what the next class should be, and one suggestion was that we take a book and we have an interactive class with a couple of people preparing a chapter by chapter from the book. And one of the books that he suggested, and I think it may be suitable for everybody, but there are others that I can share with you later on. So Sandeep and I were thinking about the Padmanabh Jain's book, Jain Path to Purification. I think that's the one that we were discussing, but there are others that we can talk about. But any one of you, if you've got an idea of what kind of book you'd like to study, we'll try and make it more interactive, giving in rotation all the class members to prepare, and then we set a discussion chapter by chapter. That is a suggestion. But if you have other ideas and you have ideas about different topics that you want to discuss at the next series of classes, then please come prepared. Send messages to Sandeepai or to me. I think you all got my WhatsApp number, and feel free. If I've said anything that is against the teachings of our Tirthankar Paramatmas or Guru Bhagwans and Dharma, I ask for forgiveness. Chinagram Virudh Kaimpan Bolyo ho, Te Samyamanachan Kaya Kari, Tasmichami Dukdam, Suramangala Mangalyam, Surkalyan Karanam, Pradhanam, Suradharmanam, Janam Jeti Sasanam. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.